Good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is Kira Foley-Tasman. I am the Chief Administrative Officer of the Union League Legacy Foundation. The Legacy Foundation is the nonprofit charity of the Union League. We are charged with using the mission, the history, and the values of the League to educate and inspire League members, the greater community, and students. Thank you all for being here with us tonight. We achieve our mission through civics education programs for high school students, scholarships for college, caring for and sharing the collections of the League. And one of the ways we care and share those collections is through our exhibit. And all of you have a rack card for our newest exhibit, which just opened a couple of weeks ago, down in the Heritage Center on the ground floor of the Broad Street building. So make sure you check that out. All of the work of the Legacy Foundation is made possible through the generosity of League members and others who make charitable contributions to our work. So thank you so much for those of you who have already opted to support our work. And if you haven't, we're always willing to correct that. You could see myself or John Miko, our executive director, and we'll be happy to correct that. So tonight's program is going to run about an hour in length. The last bit of that hour, about 15 minutes, will be questions and answers. So we will have mics that we will be walking around the room. Please make sure that you use a mic for your question because we are streaming the program and that will make sure that we capture everything tonight. Questions, we would say, are 2 to 3 sentences. And if you can't put a question mark at the end of that last sentence, you have failed. We've been very good. Please don't fail us. So a few other pieces. Please make sure to silence your cell phones. And then I would love to introduce our one of our Legacy Foundation board members, Greg Melanson, to further introduce tonight's program. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kira, and thanks to all of you, not only for coming this evening, but for your generous support. As Kira said, it makes a huge difference in everything we do. And you guys are in for a treat. I couldn't be more excited to hear our speakers this evening. I think you guys, once they get going, will be similarly thrilled. It's really just a bit of a blessing to have speakers of this caliber come here and talk to us after you've all endured a few months of political advertising and bitter partisan divide. We have a couple guys in a room where we care about the Constitution and the free enterprise system who are here to talk to us about what just happened, what's about to happen. And when you think about who you want to talk about that, I simply couldn't think of two better people. I'm not much for formal intros, and I know you'd rather hear from those guys than me, but let me start simply by saying, if you're the kind of person who cares about government and you're a government nerd like I can be, Bruce Mehlman has done a number of things in government. I won't attempt to list them all, but he was Assistant Secretary of Commerce under President George W. Bush. David Castagnetti has worked closely with Senator Kerry in his presidential run, has worked with Senator Baucus, has worked with Congressman then Senator Markey, has worked with, who did I miss? Anybody? Norm Mineta, Secretary of Transportation and Congressman from California. These guys have it all covered. So if you care about government, deep expertise. If you care about business, these guys represent every CEO of every large tech company, financial services company, pharma company, you name it. There are people across this country who care deeply about their insight and who pay them an awful lot of money to come talk to them about that insight. If you care about golf like I do, Bruce is left-handed and can slice a 5-wood about 130 yards. So you have that to look forward to. But more importantly than anything else, if you care about people, these are two of the kindest, best, most thoughtful people that I've had the pleasure of working closely with for the last 15 years. And they are the epitome of what we strive to achieve by way of dialogue when we talk about some of these sensitive issues. You know, we live in a world these days where people seemingly can't come together on this. And here you have somebody who has spent a career in Republican politics, somebody who has spent a career in Democratic politics, and they have high-minded policy discussions and talk about the key issues of our day, and they do it with intellect, they do it with grace, they do it with civility, and I'm very pleased to welcome them to the stage, and I hope you will do the same.
Thank you. I'll stand on the right so you know I'm the Republican, because I don't have the blue tie otherwise.
Blue tie. I didn't wear a tie, so we could make the distinction. So just say,
I thought you were
Greg.
going to go with like the Fetterman short.
Actually, I left my sweatshirt upstairs. If I can go get it, I'll be back. Thank you, Greg, for that kind introduction. Clearly, you spoke to our mothers before we came, so we appreciate it. John, Kara, thank you very much for allowing us to come to this beautiful facility and learn more about the Urban League as well. We really appreciate it. We're hoping to get one more portrait of a post-World War II Democrat in the portrait gallery, but we'll work on that afterwards, if that's okay.
Try for post 1830.
Just a couple opening thoughts. We're living in an age of disruption, and I'll make two general observations before we get into the details of it. One happened in Philadelphia, right? And it wasn't the signing of the Declaration of Independence. It was the 88-win Philadelphia Phillies going all the way to the World Series this year. You cannot be any more disruptive than what the Phillies put together for their run. The second thing is that's still unbelievable to me in our business is after all these years of disruption that we've had in politics, the pollsters and the people who pay attention to House races still can't get it right, right? So we're living in this world where everything is kind of jumbled up. And we're going to kind of explain what this means, what voters are thinking, and what is going on in Washington, D.C.
So we will talk about the election. We also recognize we're two guys from Washington with a bunch of slides standing between you and dinner and your drinking. So we'll try to keep it moving pretty fast here. Before we get into the what just happened and why within the election, we think it fits into a broader context. To understand politics and policy today, you actually have to take a look over the last 3 decades, because there have been some extraordinary changes all around the world that really define how Americans think and how so much of our politics fit into a broader scheme. They're technological, geopolitical, cultural trends. So technologically, over the last 3 decades, everything has been digitized, networked, and made mobile. That's created amazing opportunities to run a smarter business, to create a software product that can instantly be sold to 4 billion people. But it's also created challenges. McKinsey Global Institute says we have a superstar economy, where those with more education, those with more skills, those who are better at tech, not only have a lead, but their lead is growing. And we see inequality as high as it's ever been in this country. And so what we found is, heading in, even before the pandemic, we were amidst a backlash. Technology was upending how we work, live, play, and learn, making winners and losers. And that led a lot of the folks who didn't feel like they were winning, maybe it's their company, maybe it's them as an individual, maybe it's their town, to feel pretty disrupted. That, over the last 3 decades, is pretty extraordinary, but it's not all that happened. 3 decades ago, roughly as well, the Berlin Wall came down, the Cold War ended, and you had major reforms in India and China bring them into the global economy. You had the EU was born in 1993, 94 NAFTA passed, and the World Trade Organization is created. The upshot? Hyperglobalization, opportunity to tap global talent, global capital, global markets. That's really good. But here again, for a lot of Americans, that was not an unalloyed good. A lot of people who were in manufacturing say their job got outsourced to China, or maybe their assembly job got outsourced to Mexico, or their IT job got outsourced to Bangalore. And what we saw around the world a backlash against the post-Cold War hyperglobalization. And it took the form of populists running against the establishment all around the world. Bolsonaro in Brazil, AMLO in Mexico, Modi in India, Boris Johnson and the Brexiteers in the UK, Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump in the United States. To go from a Cold War to a hyper-globalized world, that also was really disruptive. But while those two things were shaking up how we thought, how we work, live, play, and learn, the country was changing. America in 1970 was overwhelmingly white, Christian, non-college educated. Not that many opportunities for women in the workforce. Thanks to accelerating immigration, thanks to multiple civil rights movements, we are a far more diverse and pluralistic society. There are more opportunities for women in the workforce. More people go to college. New voices can be heard. That's good. But one of the voices that got lost in all this was the voice of the referee. Because the most trusted person in 1970s America wasn't a business leader or a government leader or a military figure. It was the guy who read the news on TV. It was Walter Cronkite. Americans would watch the news with our families to be informed. What's happening with Vietnam or Sputnik or Watergate? And when we thought about politics and policy, we started with a set of shared facts. These days, the media is less likely to inform than they are to affirm. If you're right of center, you're more likely to watch Fox. If you're left of center, you're more likely to watch MSNBC or CNN. And we're less likely to see the other side as the loyal opposition and more likely to see them as a threat to our way of life. And so here again, just like there's a backlash against tech, there's a digitization, there's a backlash against globalization, there's a backlash in this case regarding the pace of change, where those who are left of center say change is coming too damn slow. How are women paid less for doing the exact same job? How's there still so much racism evident in how we do policing? A right of center voter would say, I feel like a stranger in my own community. There's so much immigration. I feel like there's so much political correctness. I'm afraid to say what I believe. And so that led to two broad societal realities that are shaping our politics. Number one.
A little bit is, where do we stand with our institutions and our trust in 10 major institutions that we've looked at through polling with Gallup? And basically, if you look pre-1975, the line is coming down, 6 out of the 10 of our major institutions had approvals over 50%. Basically today, every one of those major institutions is moving in the wrong direction, except for the military, right? And matter of fact, if someone can introduce me to that 8% of people who thinks Congress is doing a good job, I'd love to meet a couple of those folks if possible.
We used this slide like 6 months ago, and we had to change the x-axis because they fell below 10.
So you're seeing that trust has completely devolved. Where do we turn for the referee that Bruce talked about? Who's the Walter Cronkite that's providing us guidance and kind of that impartiality that goes with it? And a little bit as we start to look at elections and if there's a change, in other words, if the Democrats represented the presidency, the Republicans won, or the Republicans represented the Senate, the Democrats won, there was a change election that took place. When we looked at the elections in the 60s and 70s, that happened 3 times. When we looked at the elections of the 80s and 90s, that happened 4 times. When we look at the elections of the 2000s, it's happened 10 out of 12 times, right? You can just see how voters are unclear about who they want as their leaders, who's in charge, where do they stand, who's turning out to vote, right? So there's a lot of questions and uncertainty that's existing as people kind of redefine themselves into this new modern family.
And I might further add to it, those being the two broad themes. The electorate doesn't trust institutions and the electorate is looking for change. But what explains this in my mind is that people look at the policies and the parties and the institutions that were created in the 20th century for the 20th century. And most Americans feel fragile. They don't feel protected. They don't know who's got their back. So they're voting for change. We have an electorate that doesn't trust institutions and an electorate that is fragile and it feels scared. And I think that explains what happened in 2022, and we will explain how.
And it's bigger than Donald Trump, right? Remember, Donald Trump wasn't until 2016. It was already taking place. That
So
change.
you get to say what happened, because
Here's kind of what happened. We still don't know the answer exactly to what happened. And that may take a little bit longer, but basically we should assume the Republicans are going to be in charge. They probably will be somewhere around 220, according to NBC. That number might be slightly higher, it might be down to 219. We'll kind of see how it plays out. The Democrats are going to control the Senate. That's clear. They have 50 votes. What happens in Georgia in another less than 30 days at this point will determine if that gets to 51 or not. I will say one little caveat to add, though, even if the Democrats win that 51st seat, is what does Joe Manchin do? I wouldn't rule that out, assuming he's going to run potentially for re-election. There's enough kind of angst that's happening in DC about that. And certainly there've been a number of conversations about it. And finally, the interesting place really is what's happening in the governor's race. And you saw this a little bit in Pennsylvania. You probably had, you probably couldn't turn the television on anymore because all it was political ads. But the Democrats are controlling 2 extra seats they picked up. They picked up Massachusetts and they picked up Maryland in the scope of the elections, and including there in Massachusetts, Maryland, Wisconsin, Minnesota. They even swept the state legislature, so they actually controlled that as well. So it's a different kind of election that took place.
And we traded Arizona and Nevada governorships, so it ultimately is the net too. So why? Why did this happen? First and foremost, at least as I look at it, let's not overthink what happened. There were 17 states that had Senate elections that had voted, the states had voted for Donald Trump in 2022. All 17 voted for the Republican. There were 16 states that in 2020 voted for Joe Biden. 15 of those 16, all but Wisconsin, which was a narrow Biden win and was a narrow Senator Johnson, the incumbent win, held on. Georgia is, you can't see, but it's dotted. Obviously, if Georgia flips, then it would be 2. But bottom line, Trump states went red, Biden states went blue. Right now, assuming Senator Warnock wins, 28 of 28 Senate incumbents, not open seats like Pennsylvania, but incumbents, 28 of 28 won, 27 of 28 incumbent governors won, and about 355 of 365 incumbent House members won.
Bruce, how far back do you have to go? Oh, you're going to go into that?
I am. So again, when people are like, can you believe that the president's party held the Senate? I say, yes, I can. The 9 last presidents whose party had the Senate, so like George H.W. Bush, the Republicans didn't hold the Senate in 1990. I didn't include that on the chart. But the last 9 times you were in the first midterm election, not second. President, I mean, a lot of people lose the Senate in their second midterm elections. Reagan did, Obama did. But 9 of the last time the president held the Senate. The House also follows a predictable pattern.
Very predictable pattern, right? Presidents usually lose on average of about 26 seats. Biden's in the category of somewhere around 8. That might be move up or down 1 or 2, but it's very different dynamic. He's setting a different tone, again, defying history, living in an age of disruption that we're living in. We're seeing new trends take place.
And a lot of people thought it was going to be, a red wave election, or maybe it was a Roe v. Wade, wave election, or blue. I tried to go Dr. Seuss here, red wave, blue wave, Roe wave, no wave. A wave election, independents break double digits for the party that enjoys the wave. You saw that for the Democrats in 06 and 18. You saw that for the Republicans in 2010 and 2014. The difference was net 2. This was just not a wave election. That's why all the incumbents came back in a lot of ways. However, to give credit where credit is due,
President certainly outperformed everywhere, right? A little bit. Everyone was saying, oh, the president needs to talk about the economy. Well, guess what? It wasn't the economy, stupid. There's a different dynamic that's taking place. The messaging work, the organization work, the ability to drive voters works. Right? That is fundamentally what's going on. And the Democrats had enough of an appeal to the independents to help carry them through at the end of the day. And a little bit, as you saw the share, the number of voters who voted is still way over historic norms, right? We're at about 47%, which is on the high end of people who wanted to vote, right? Not quite, obviously, to the midterm elections 4 years ago, but enough that people are in that hyperactive mode and they're getting out to vote, whether they're mailing it in or waiting in line to vote. They're doing it and they're believing it. And especially young voters are really carrying a message back to people right now.
All right, so macro trends are macro trends. Diving into it, also what should be captain obvious and was to some and apparently not to others is that candidates matter. Raise your hand in this room if you remember Christine O'Donnell from 2010. So in 2010, now President Biden, then he had become Vice President Biden. So his Senate seat in Delaware was up for the remainder of the term, a special election. The candidate the Republicans had, guaranteed, my kind of moderate, Governor Castle had been the governor, had been the congressman. He was winning by 30 points in his average elections, and in every head-to-head poll against any Democrat in Delaware, he was winning by double digits. But he lost the primary to Christine O'Donnell, who then, in running in the general, has to run an ad where she looks in the camera and she says, and I quote, "I'm not a witch." Google it. It's awesome. Now, if you have to run a TV ad disclaiming witchcraft, and you're not running for like mayor of Salem, Massachusetts, in 1684, something's going wrong with your campaign. Same with how do Republicans lose a seat in Alabama, and it's they nominated somebody who apparently was banned from going to the mall. When you look at the Republican slate of candidates this year, there were a lot of first-timers who ran poor campaigns. J.D. Vance won in Ohio. It's a Trump +8 state, but he needed a whole lot of help from outside because he wasn't running a particularly a good or sophisticated campaign. Republicans, as you guys know well, but Republicans did not put the strongest possible candidates forward. In fact, they did just the opposite. And as a result, they lost a lot of seats they could have won. Because when I think about who I would have liked to see us run, you run Governor Sununu in New Hampshire and we win that Senate seat. He was up by double digits against Senator Hassan in the polling. If Governor Kemp had decided that he knew he was going to win for governor, but if he had decided to run for Senate, I don't think we're in a runoff at this point. My home state, our home state governor, Larry Hogan, it's Maryland. Yeah, Maryland's really blue. It's hard, even for a popular governor, as Bobby Ehrlich saw, it's hard to jump over to the Senate, but man, would the Dems have to spend a lot of money there. And instead, they didn't have to spend anything because we nominated a knucklehead, even in Arizona. Blake Masters was a terrible, terrible candidate, whereas the term-limited Governor Ducey was popular and would have been totally fine.
Just one point on
Yeah.
that, Bruce, if I may, just to interrupt for a second. The one thing I think all those popular governors didn't want to do was tarnish their own records. They didn't have to want to run as kind of the Donald Trump populist type person, right? So they made decisions that also enhanced their own brand, potentially moving over. And, the other guy I would throw in that mix would be Charlie Baker from Massachusetts as well. You can see many of these folks thinking about their own futures as well.
So of course that's true, but these are the same dudes running in the same states with the exact same set of voters. So, President Trump was always going after, he didn't like the fact that Arizona didn't find a way to make him, even after the cyber ninjas actually learned that he won by more, Biden won by more. One example, though, of a Republican running a really effective race, there was a red wave in 2022. It was in Florida because Governor DeSantis, he picks a lot of culture fight wars. It really upsets the media. It really upsets lots of people. And I think often in a mean-spirited sort of way, but he is thought of as a very competent governor. When Hurricane Ian came, folks that I speak to in Florida say he was absolutely all over it. And, some wonder, was DeSantis pretending to be normal and he's really secretly a Trump person? I think he's pretending to be a Trump culture warrior. And he's actually, Harvard Law, JAG, served in the military. I think he sees where he's got to be politically, but he runs normally. He outperformed Donald Trump in every demographic, including white voters with no college, which is Trump's core support. DeSantis in 22 against Charlie Crist did better than Biden in 2020. And it is an apples to orange comparison to sure.
I thought what you were going to say about DeSantis is he was a former Yale baseball player like President Bush, right? They kind of share something. The numbers that are really scary to me as a Democrat in that, look how well DeSantis did with younger voters and with Hispanic voters, right? Those are numbers that you can see carry you on a different national stage.
And if you didn't bring your driving glasses in the back half of the room, we can get you the slides afterward. But, so what was the impact of Donald Trump was not in this election, was he, Mr. Castagnetti?
Well, certainly from the Democratic perspective, he was. There was no question about it, right? Every race that you saw, Donald Trump was the boogeyman. We didn't want Donald Trump back in. We used him as a motivating tool to get our voters to vote. And a little bit, Bruce mentioned already, he helped recruit weaker candidates. But you know what that really meant for us as Democrats? Again, allowed us to use the Trump name. And more importantly, it allowed the Republicans to continue to fight each other, right? McConnell didn't want many of Trump's candidates in the Senate. he had a very different take. McCarthy's in a different situation, right? He's basically got 140 Donald Trump guys or people, excuse me, that he has to deal with, right? So you're seeing a different set of politics. Remember how the Democrats were doing all the infighting the last 2 years? All that infighting is now going to the Republicans and motivating the Democratic voter, right? Because Republicans who mastered the ability of early vote, now that it's a bad thing for them to do, they've allowed the Democrats to catch up. And now we actually use it to our advantage. And if you look specifically at what happened in Nevada over the last week, it was all on the late vote, all on the mail-in vote that made the difference for Democrats. And finally, because Trump knocked out some candidates in the House, specifically in state of Washington and Ohio, we were able to pick up some seats. And you saw what happened. You lived what happened in the Pennsylvania governor's race here, right? So he was a very useful tool for us and really helped kind of slow the process down and get people out to vote.
Now, he wasn't the only force putting candidates on the battlefield that weren't the strongest candidates.
Here's the greatest thing that happened, right? Harry Reid taught us this a number of years ago. You want to run against the candidate you want to run against, right? Bruce's comment about Christine O'Donnell, that was brilliant, right? You couldn't ask for a better candidate if you're Chris Coons, right? The ad is about a witch. I thought the place he really was going to go was the person in Missouri who said that rape was okay, right? Like that is unbelievable. Like when you think about what happened.
It was a different, equally horrible comment, but
not much.
Yes.
So basically what you do is you help the candidate who is the weakest and you make him or her to be the strongest person on the Republican side and the craziest, right? A Donald Trump revival, basically. And when you saw this happen in the Pennsylvania governor race. The other place where it was really prominent was in New Hampshire, where it played out both in the Senate and House races as well. And if you're J.B. Pritzker and you can, have a whole bunch of money, you can really define who your candidate is. And that's a whole different story.
And the only thing I would want to add on that is it was definitely effective. So hats off. At the same time, if you aren't full of what when you claim you're worried about threats to democracy and that you want responsible Republicans, don't spend money against responsible Republicans to endorse and promote threats to democracy. None of these guys slipped through the goal this time, but
Bruce, you clearly didn't read Vince Lombardi's book. It's all about winning.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So those are the candidates. Let's move on to the issues. Issues mattered here too.
This is actually one time where issues really did matter. It wasn't candidate versus candidate, right? As Bruce was talking about, you had kind of the definition of candidates. The interesting thing about the Dobbs decision, the Roe versus Wade decision, a lot of people thought it really was going to be focused at suburban women. And actually, when you look at the CNN exit polling, Democrats lost suburban women, suburban white women specifically. But the interesting thing, what it really did is it brought out the young voters. And back to my other comment, it's not about the economy, stupid. There were real issues that came up. And those issues were, it was about the ability to have the right to choose. It was women's health care that the Democrats played it into. And it was about civil rights and taking away your rights, right? Again, look at that motivation in that Democratic column about why Democrats came out to vote and prioritizing those issues, even though it was done under the abortion or the pro-choice mantra, there were healthcare and rights issues that went with it, right? So a very motivating factor beyond just the Roe decision.
Well, and it goes back to people feel fragile. And this caused a lot more folks to feel unsettled and worried. And what they voted was fear, often. Fear that something that had been a right for 50 years just got taken away, and that bothered them. Political advice, if you have a 60-40 issue and you're on the 40 side, you start in a hole. Now, what I assumed the election, what I assumed the election was going to be based on, David is 1,000% right. The Democrats outperformed expectations by a ton. Some of that was polling, some of that was other stuff, but the president's approval, according to the voters who voted, was in the low 40s. So this isn't a suddenly everybody woke up and decided Biden is great. Another reason people are stressed out, this is why the Republicans ultimately did gain seats and picked up the House, and why they were so close, is it's the economy, stupid. People are scared about the economy. If you look at the first 3 quarters of GDP growth, this election year, yellow, versus the last 10 midterms, worst by a mile. How about consumer confidence? Worst of any election year last reading. How about inflation? Worst in 40 years. How about the S&P from January 1 in the year to the election day? Not so good.
In the Castagnetti household, I changed the password to my 401k account so Ann couldn't look at it anymore. I was like, you got to stop. I can't handle it anymore.
Also, one thing we saw is that if you ran on being a competent governor, if you ran on a positive message, if you ran on your plan to help people deal with whether it's broader changes, whether it's crime or something else, and you didn't spend all of your time claiming the 2020 election was rigged, or for that matter, a 2018 election was rigged, you won. And in fact, you won independence. In the case of Governor DeWine by 25 points, New Hampshire, Governor Sununu won independence by 21 points. By contrast, if you suggested that, if core to your narrative is that there were stolen elections, nobody proved it, but the truth is out there, which all those Republicans did, as well as Stacey Abrams, who's an admirable person, but never conceded in 2018. For a lot of folks, they said, we're tired of this. We've got real problems. We want to go forward, not backward. And I think you see that with the mood too.
You see that with the mood, right? Like, people are obviously dissatisfied with their own situations, dissatisfied with where the country's heading, and they're really looking to the future, right? To Bruce's point, they're not looking backwards. They want to move ahead. They want to get some stability back into their lives one more time.
All right, so speaking of wanting to move ahead, we'll talk about 7 trends, and then we'll end with 2 reasons that you won't kick us out of the building or until you maybe fed
we're
us.
actually optimists at the core. I know that's hard to believe, but.
So here are 7 trends. First, it's going to be a very chaotic year in 2022. David, I start with a question for you. Do you think Speaker Pelosi, who I think of sort of like Tom Brady, like she should have retired, but she just keeps coming back and winning? So
yeah, so I was actually thinking about that headline actually tonight before it came down, and it should be, is it the end of the Pelosi?
I don't know.
Right? Is really the way I would define it right now. I mean, think about what's happened, right? Since the Democrats overperformed, she obviously had a very, very unfortunate issue at her home. Lucky that her husband is still alive, right? And you're dealing with that. And in the meantime, the president of the United States calls you and says, hey, Speaker, you said you're going to leave. I don't want you to leave. She has rank and file members coming to her saying the same thing, right? Is it the end of a Pelosi era or not? A couple of weeks ago, I might have said, yeah. Today, I kind of feel like there might be some more fight left in Mrs. Pelosi as we move forward here.
So speaking of fight, what's the Senate board mean for the Democrats over the next 2 years?
Yeah, the Senate is a very interesting place as you start. Yeah, we haven't even finished 2022 election, and we're already talking about 2024. Shows you how bad we are, right, in terms of what our lives are like, right? So look at 2024 and look at the map the Democrats have to defend. Nevada, New Mexico, Arizona, West Virginia, Montana, Ohio, right? The list goes on and on of potential states that the Democrats could lose. And how do you find that balance? It's got to be kind of somewhere in the middle. The one saving grace for the Democrats is many of those states, take away Montana and West Virginia and Ohio, but the other states are also places where whoever the presidential nominee is for the Democrats, they have to win those states as well, right? So you're going to see a ton of money coming into them, including, once again, I will apologize, but for 2024, you will see nothing but political ads in Pennsylvania one more time.
So on the Republican side, Mitch McConnell will be reelected leader. His biggest problem is when he has a conference lunch, half the room may be empty because they're all running for president. And on the House side, it's a very narrow. Kevin McCarthy was just chosen by 80% of his members to be the speaker, although that one requires a floor vote, unlike the Senate. The challenge is when you take a look at the operating margins in the House of Representatives, red Republican, blue Democrat, you can't see the numbers, but what it's circled there, we're assuming 220, 215. That is a margin of 5. That is the smallest operating margin for a House Republican conference since 1831, 1832, when the giant Republican majority got totally wiped out by the Great Depression. That empowers factions, and Republicans have a faction or two that's going to make it difficult.
One thing on that, Bruce, just let me comment, just today there was a vote on the vote that Bruce referred to about McCarthy becoming speaker. He had 31 Republicans vote against him, right? Now, it's a secret ballot, not a public ballot. He will figure out how to get to 218, assuming the Republicans stay in control. But to Bruce's point on managing factions, he's got 31 people who aren't exactly pleased that he's the person that's going to lead them. And how does he manage that in a margin of 5?
Although that, you're right, that is a family, that was a family. So it's sort of like a primary. In theory, the party comes together. I want this, you want this, but we agree. If folks do what they're supposed to do, you are always part of the team. It's, I mean, hell, look at where we are. It's ultimately, you don't leave the union. You don't leave the team. You want it one way, I want it one way, but in the end, we come back together is what's supposed to happen. We'll see if they on the floor vote against them, because you can't afford to lose any votes on the floor. It's going to be an epic era of oversight. And unlike the traditional, we're going to look, Republicans will look at Hunter Biden and laptop, Democrats will look at Mar-a-Lago and documents, and that we kind of all expect. But I think we're going to see more businesses in the dock than we're used to seeing. I think you're going to see at some point a CEO subpoenaed by Democrats in the Senate to testify why on Tuesday subpoenaed, why are you going so slow on decarbonization? The planet is melting down with climate change. And that same CEO on Wednesday will have been subpoenaed by the House Republicans. Why are you doing all of this woke ESG stuff instead of maximizing shareholder values? Businesses are finding themselves increasingly, the Democrats online, Democrats say you need to do more content moderation. That means censorship of voices that they consider dangerous. Republicans say you need to do less censorship. Good luck with that, business leaders. Fiscal fights. We've just been through a hell of a couple of years. Historically, that happens. And what you see is the federal government budget goes, you have a crisis, and you have crisis spending, World War I, Spanish flu, and then there's an austerity hangover. In each case, it's a Democratic president with a Republican Congress. In this case, it was Woodrow Wilson and the Republicans in 1919, and they were suddenly fighting about spending. World War II. Harry Truman starts fighting when the Republicans take over in 46, and there's this big fight about, what we should do with the austerity hangover. With President Obama, we put up a lot of money because it was the great financial collapse, but then there was the fight that led over the debt ceiling, led to sequestration, which is across the board cuts, and then a government shutdown. So over the last 3 years, national debt is up by a third, last 4 years. Federal spending is up by 40%. Inflation is at a 40-year high. Republicans, and I say this as a lifelong Republican, desperately care about fiscal responsibility when we don't hold the White House. And we don't hold the White House. So we're going to see a lot of brinksmanship around the debt ceiling and around spending for government. How about the agencies, David?
So I think as you think about the agencies and what's going to happen over the next couple of years, remember that Biden believes in government, right? Biden is an FDR Democrat. That's how he grew up. Government is here to protect individuals. Right? So when you look at what government can do between oversight, regulation, or enforcement, each bucket has an interesting story to tell, right? So as we look at oversight, the Federal Trade Commission is going to look at a number of mergers that already happened and ask companies are they going to renegotiate with companies? Not to mention what they'll do with, the Apples and the Amazons of the world. Or conversely, in the regulation space, clearly, after what happened with FTX yesterday, you think there's not going to be a whole bunch of discussion amongst these agencies about how do we handle the crypto situation? I would think so if somebody just lost $1 billion. Or most importantly, when you look at regulation and what the Securities and Exchange Commission has done in the past 2 years, they've collected $6.5 billion in fines amongst corporate America, the highest ever. And the head of that division said, my job's not to make the number higher. My job is to slow things down and make people think and make sure they're doing the right thing, right? So you can see an activist government take place, because this is one thing the president can control without dealing with the House Republicans or the Senate Democrats, for that matter, and make stuff happen.
All right, so number 6 of 7, if you're in a global business, if you have a global supply chain, it's going to get harder, not because of the election, but because the world is changing. For the last 3 decades, here's what we found. The world was getting wired with high-speed internet, which made it easier to run global inventory and to do more trade. We thought US and China were going to be symbiotic. They would grow and they would evolve and become more like us. They'd protect intellectual property. They'd become more democratic. That was the Washington consensus. Chimerica was going to be good for everybody. Globalization was supposed to be a rising tide that would lift all boats. The job of a CEO was to maximize shareholder value, period. It was all about prioritizing efficiency just in time. And the big macro forces, the hundreds of millions of workers from China and India joining the global economy, that was really disinflationary. Fracking, making America self-reliant or energy independent and able to export energy, really disinflationary. Containerization, super disinflationary. If we think about the next decade, and let's pretend COVID has fully gone away, and for that matter, let's say while we're up here, Putin has apologized and retreated from Ukraine, which would be nice. All of these are flipping in reverse, and these are massive business challenges. So first, whether it's the EU or whether it's California, on the cause of content moderation, consumer protection, competition policy, cross-border data flows are slowing down. The United States and China are decoupling. Most severe at tech, but we're going to see a lot more restrictions on Americans' ability to invest, even as LPs, in a lot of Chinese technology going forward. The era of globalization is massively challenged by economic nationalism. If the way folks feel, they don't want somebody talking about globalization. Even President Biden, who I think deserves a lot of credit for leading NATO against Vladimir Putin, will tell you that his Buy America procurement policies are going to be a lot stricter than Donald Trump's. That's economic nationalism. We're seeing the same thing in India and Mexico and all around the world. It's no longer simply maximizing shareholder value. It's also thinking about the community you operate in. It's thinking about your employees. It's thinking a little bit longer term. It might make for, I think, better corporate America if we think about it right, but it's inflationary. It's not simply just in time. It's also just in case. And we're no longer finding the global labor force bringing prices down. Concerns about climate change mean energy prices aren't going to go back to the way they were. Finally, number 7, when I think about a nation that's been rocked, we got a global pandemic, there's race riots in the streets, there's, the young are fighting the old, there's worry about lots of civil rights issues. For that matter, we're fighting about abortion. Yes, that's today, but it was also 1968, brutal political race. And that was followed by going to the moon. And not only was that a great shot in the arm for the nation, but that really was what launched the semiconductor industry. That launched a ton of material science that had great benefits for the rest of society. It's easy to get distressed by the headlines, but so many amazing things. The fastest vaccine in human history was more than 4 years until COVID. With mRNA and so many of the digital technologies that have been accelerated over the last couple of years, I think we're in for both faster innovation, but also healthier living, higher productivity, more empowered people. One of the reasons we're talking about is the Chicago School of Antitrust still applicable, or do we need to rethink it for Amazon, et cetera, is we also realize that digital disruption is challenging for a lot of people. It's why they keep voting for change in part, and we're going to have to think those rules and get them right. So we'll conclude, applause, with 2 reasons for hope. Reason number 1, if you go from election day in a midterm, 365 days later, back from 1950, every year the S&P 500 has gone up. So don't trade on this, or if you did, whatever the disclaimer I'm supposed to say, past performance is no guarantee of not losing all your money, but that's helpful. But here's number 2. It's really easy to be distressed by the headlines. I mean, I remember the stories in the pandemic. I remember the story in like 2020, there was a story about the murder hornets in the state of Washington. Like, I am convinced they're going to sting me. So like, I didn't want to go outside for a month because there was a murder hornet.
Jim will work one day with this big suit on.
You know, it's
Doesn't quite show
everybody
why.
should have a beekeeper suit at home just in case there could be murder hornets. But what I found is if I, read history, detach myself from the day to day, you can be reminded that what is the biggest story in the news is not necessarily the biggest thing that changes the world. The biggest story in the news in 1994 was Newt Gingrich and the Republican revolutionaries capturing the House for the first time in 40 years. But was that a bigger
I
event?
lost my job that day.
Or was the fact that the world's first web browser launched e-commerce, which nobody paid attention in 1994 to that, really. In 2001, obviously the 9/11 terror attacks should have been the biggest news. I mean, that was hideous. That was horrible. But what's going to shape 2025 more? 9/11 and the aftermath, or the fact that China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001 and rapidly rose to be a peer competitor of the United States technologically, in trade for sure, increasingly militarily. In 2007, we were all worried about the mortgage foreclosure crisis. That led the news. The iPhone came out, and I vividly recall telling Castagnetti he could take my BlackBerry from my cold, dead hand. There was no way I was going to give that up. I missed that, but that's, from how we navigate to Uber Eats, that's changed the world. We've all been really focused on a scary pandemic. I'm convinced we're missing things. Maybe some of you are working on those things. But our nation is resilient. Our nation finds a way. We come together. I think the league is a great example of a way in which Americans come together, find solutions, and power forward. So don't let the news get you totally down. Don't let our analysis of the elections get you totally down. The things that you're doing and the things that our fellow countrymen are doing are making a difference every day and making it a better place. We're grateful for your having us here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Bruce. We have time for a few questions. And again, please use the microphones.
Gentlemen, right there.
This isn't original with me, but I'll pose the question anyway. Can Trump win the 2024 nomination without the support of the conservative media? And the corollary to that is DeSantis the future of the Republican Party?
We thought you might ask a question about that, so we actually have one more spot. Look, I don't know what time it is right now. It's 7 o'clock. He's announcing in 2 hours. He's running. I tell you, I think DeSantis can beat him, but Castagnetti would tell you, I've declared Trump dead 10 times. He comes down the escalator. He says Mexicans are rapists. I'm like, he's done. He picks on John McCain. He says he doesn't like war heroes who were captured. He's done. So I'm definitely writing him off, but I always write him off. And, like a vampire, he just keeps coming back, or zombie or something. Why don't we'll real quick, we'll talk about each side. David, is Biden going to run if Trump runs? And if not, who are you guys going to put up?
So I'm going to go on the Trump thing first. I think he starts out with about 35 to 40% of the Republican Party, right? He still has a massive following. Question is, where are they and how does it go through a primary process? And does DeSantis redefine who the party is? Yeah. Yes, he has the ability to talk direct to consumer.
We'll see about the media too, though, right?
Yeah,
because
that may change.
Murdoch is clearly gone, but I'm not sure I've seen Tucker and others gone.
Yeah.
The bottom line is, I think he's going to run. I think for the reasons David said, he starts with a plurality. It's possible that a lot of folks, Ted Cruz and others are young enough, they're not going to want to go head to head against him. And so maybe that allows a mano a mano. He's got a 40%, but that's both a floor and a ceiling. So I don't know that he could win a majority, but he definitely can win a plurality. You raise a great question, though, is, will the media quit him if it's good for the media? And there's right now a very self-destructive for the party nationally MAGA echo chamber. But anybody who goes after it finds they lose enough of their primary base, or maybe they lose enough of their viewers if they're Fox, if they're a Fox commentator. And so you're right, as long as he's riding that tiger, he's pretty formidable. They're not going after DeSantis yet, though, because DeSantis is fighting all the culture wars they want to see fought. So I'm saying there's a chance.
Also depends what Elon Musk does with Twitter too, and how we change social media.
Here, you have a question right there.
Technocratic question. you had a slide on percentage of eligible voters. Does that include people who are eligible or eligible and registered?
Eligible. There's a University of Florida professor, McDonald, who we can't crunch those numbers. He has a U.S. election project is his website. It goes way back. It's fantastic, but it's voting eligible population.
That's different from those who are actually going to vote because many of them are not registered.
Correct.
Becca, we have a question from one of our students.
Hi. So my question was, after seeing, like, say the John Fetterman Oz debate, the performance from both candidates wasn't the best, or saying the Katie Hobbs and Carrie Lake election, there was no debate at all. So how do you think, I guess, the American people, how they've lost faith in Congress and many other institutions, they've lost faith in the debates between candidates? Or do you think maybe just in general, they don't matter anymore and maybe hiding away, in quotes, I guess, is a better strategy than actually going out and talking to your candidate?
So can I start on that one?
Please.
So I'm going to answer that with a Joe Biden quote, right? Joe Biden says, "Don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative," right? And that's where the debate in politics basically has evolved to. We're not kind of trying to reach the highest levels. We're trying to be slightly better than the person we're running against. But I can remember, to your question on debates, I ran a race in 1996, Senate race in Montana, where usually incumbents didn't want to do the debates and the challengers did. So we took an opposite attack. We were disruption in 1996. We went to our opponent and said, "We'll debate you 3 times. Here are the dates, and here are the people who are going to be the moderators." So we put him on the defensive. Today, where you've come, and you again saw this in Pennsylvania, you guys are living it, right? The Fetterman-Oz race was classic, where you had one debate that took place, whole host of reasons why or why not, and we can debate that. You also have the ability, to your point on candidates and who candidates can speak to, they're speaking to voters very differently, right? They're speaking directly to us, right? We're being affirmed on our social media. Either they're talking through us through Facebook or TikTok or Instagram or whatever they're using directly to us. And that's where they're having the debate of ideas, is much more on a social media platform than you and I standing on the stage having a mano-a-mano type discussion, right? And it's really going to be interesting. And a little bit back to the gentleman's question about kind of the role of media. Media is going to have to decide, is that a valuable business decision for them to encourage debates because it brings viewers in and advertising in and leads to more news coverage or not? It's really going to kind of, I think, be an interesting question about what's going to happen. And by the way, as we get into the presidential election cycle, the RNC has already, the Republican National Committee has already decided they're not going to take place in the presidential debate, or certainly use the existing process that we've used for the last 40 years, right? So you're seeing all these changes taking place. Again, disruption that's taking place, no different than what we're living in the rest of the world.
I'll take a slightly contrary, it's a great question. I'll take a slightly contrary answer of, I think debates are ingrained in our politics and will be more often the norm. And I think, you know, when one of the candidates had a stroke or I think there will be exceptions to the rule. You know, in the case of Arizona, everybody said that was going to cost her the race because she was afraid to debate Lake, who we presumed would be great. Turns out she won. So I guess she knew enough. But I think more often than not, it's something that voters want to see. It's something that candidates recognize that if you hide from it, it can be a liability, but not every case, not every election, not all the time. I think anybody but Donald Trump, but DeSantis would love to debate Joe Biden.
Yep.
Kira, question over here.
Yale versus the University of Delaware. Is that where you're going on that one?
What are your thoughts on open primaries? What would be the positive and negative effects?
So I'm a big fan of Final Five, they call it, but I think one of the things that poisons our politics is the fact that 15% of Republicans vote, and it's usually those whose hair is most on fire in the primary, and 15% of the Democrats in the primary. And then we end up with two candidates with so many voters saying, why wasn't there somebody in the middle, or I want to vote for somebody else? And so what you're seeing in some states is instead of a Republican and a Democratic partisan primary, and the winner or whoever gets a plurality of each, they're the head-to-head, you then run a slate in the primary, and the top four, the top five all advance. And that creates a ton of room to be a moderate and to run in the middle. I think it creates a lot more opportunity for saner politics. If you combine that with ranked choice voting, which some people don't like, and it complicates it for some, but both of those are the types of reforms that make you more likely to have non-extreme candidates and more likely to have a candidate say there is, because at the end of the day, everybody responds to incentives. You show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. The incentive right now, if you're running in a Republican primary, is to go hard right, and the incentive if you're a Democrat is to go hard left. And I think reforms like that can help address that.
I think just on the practical side of it, open primary in California, right? There are probably 3 states that helped the Republicans get to the number that they needed to get to. New York, which the Democrats just screwed up, no answer to it. Florida, because of DeSantis. California, because of the open primary, right? They're going to end up picking up a couple of seats. The other thing that Bruce touched on, ranked choice voting, and to me, this is almost mind-numbing, almost up there with Bryce Harper leading the Phillies to the World Series. The Democrats have a congressperson from Alaska, right? I never thought I'd see the day where there'd be a Democrat because of ranked choice voting. So it does kind of set up a different dynamic that takes place.
Why you got to pick on Harper?
No, I'm not picking on Harper. I'm a huge Bryce Harper fan. What that guy did was unbelievable.
We have time for one more question. Mr. Higgins.
All right, I'm going to play the 3 rule. First, it's so nice
Are
to
you
see.
Catholic? Is that why you do 3?
3 runs through a lot of things. It's so nice to see people from opposite sides of issues present together information-packed presentation. So thank you for that. Second point is, early on your slides, you had one that showed that voter turnout was lower this time than last time. So now the question mark is, why do you think that was?
Well, I can start with, you're comparing it to 2018. Is voter turnout, if you look at the average, voter turnout will be higher, except for 2018, and this is for midterms, will be higher than any midterms since the 60s. So as a over the last 100 years average matter, it's way above what has been average. Why was it less than 2018? I think 2018, I think there are a couple of different reasons. I mean, in the Trump era, there was a hyperactivism has been building since the great financial collapse with the Tea Party movement and the Occupy movement, concern about kids getting gunned down in schools, concern about the climate and the environment, Ferguson, Missouri, and the birth of the Black Lives Matter movement, and the concern about police violence had been crescendoing during the Trump years. And so I think 2018 in particular was that what we opened with. People concerned about the pace of change on the left, on the right, feeling like now is a moment they need to be heard. I find 2022 close enough that I don't think we've seen a meaningful fall off. I think it's still at a heightened level. I just, it could have been one more than last time, could have been one less than last time, but I still think it's heightened. I don't view it as a significant change of things.
Bruce and David, thank you. Give us a little commercial.
It's honestly no commercial for the business. You guys don't need to hire us, but if you either never want to see knuckleheads with all these slides again, we get that a lot. Otherwise, shoot me an email. We put out quarterly analyses and we're happy to add you to the list.
Thank you very much, Bruce and David. We hope you'll join us next Monday for a program with James Oakes, Abraham Lincoln and the Crooked Path to Abolition, a great program. We'll see you next Monday, the 28th. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.